Hello patrons and welcome to a new video editing tutorial. I'm not going to bore you too much with an intro. This is all about making your animations look better, and although it's maybe not covering everything to do with animating, it covers something that I wish I had known when I was first starting with video editing, specifically when I was starting to make animations in my videos, and little bits and pieces or really just a few key tools that I use that have really helped me make animations look better when it comes to like giving it more of a I guess it's hard to describe, like more of a flow to it, or at least having more autonomy over how your animations actually look. May sound a bit weird, but you understand when you get into this tutorial. I think it'll be really helpful for those of you who are, starting to animate things in your videos, or getting into a bit of like, title graphics, animations, and you're kind of unsure of how to make it look good. It doesn't look as good as what you might see on other videos or professional videos. So that's what this is all about. I hope you find a lot of value in it. This is definitely something that I wish I'd learned when I was first starting with video editing. With that being said, let's dive right into the screen and show you what this is all about. Okay, so let's get started. We're in a After Effects composition. As I mentioned, I'm going to show you how to do some of this stuff in both After Effects and Premiere Pro. We're going to start with After Effects because that tends to be the best place to do animations, and I recommend that most of you do like animations and title graphics inside of After Effects than Premiere Pro. After Effects is just much better optimized for doing this kind of stuff than Premiere Pro is. But of course, I understand there are situations where you don't want to go through that hassle, and I'll show you how to really replicate some of the stuff we're going to do in After Effects on Premiere Pro. But let's begin. So let's imagine I'm just going to do like a text for now. So let's just write in my name, James Jani. Now remember, a lot of what I'm going to show you is applicable to like so many different areas. It can be with images, really anything that you do an animation with, so you can let your imagination run wild. So we've got the text of my name over here, and let's say we wanted to do an animation where, or let's say we had the text from over here to kind of fly into like this spot over here, right? Completely random, but let's just say we're going to be doing that, and that's what we need to get done. So typically with whenever we do animations, normally the route to do is you head on into your let's find it here, your position, and then you position it first. Let's create a keyframe first. So we're going to put a keyframe into the spot where we want the animation to begin, so it's over here. Then we're going to move across on our timeline to the spot over here, to a spot then where we want it to be. So let's just create a keyframe first and then move it to the spot that we want the animation to end. So in this case we want the text coming from here, and you can see that After Effects tends to kind of draw a line for you to see what that animation looks like, and so you've got that. I think as well, After Effects has this awesome thing where you can like click the sort of the little pointers, and you can actually change the way that animation looks. And so instead of animating in a straight line, let me Control Z to show you how we had it before. Instead of it being a straight line, it can do it in a more curved way, and you don't actually have to worry about going in and like messing with the actual keyframes themselves, when you can actually just do that through the sort of red line that it gives you in After Effects. But we don't want that, so we're going to keep it just like this, and we'll maybe mess around with that afterwards. And so anyway, this is what a normal animation would look like, and once you've done that, you can hit play and you can look at what that looks like. Okay, pretty simple, pretty basic. It doesn't look too good. Like there's something about it that just doesn't feel right. It doesn't have like more, I don't know what the right word is, but it just doesn't feel dynamic, or it doesn't have that flavor. It's just too basic of an animation. It just doesn't look that great. So there are a few things that you can do to make an animation like this, for example, look better, and these are things that I had to learn over a little bit of time of like experimenting with After Effects and watching other tutorials. The first thing, easiest thing that you can do is actually by heading over here, and you should notice it, there's you have like three sort of icons here, and you have a tick box underneath them. So one icon is sort of like two circles or a couple of circles here, and it's called motion blur. And the one next to it is adjustment layer, and the one next to it is 3D layer. We're just going to concern ourselves with the motion blur checkbox for now. Now, if you don't see any of these icons, what you can do is you can right click over here on this sort of this row here where it says source name, layer name, whatever it might be, columns, and then you can actually choose which columns you want displayed here. So if you're not seeing it, then that will mean that the switches column has been disabled. So it will look maybe something like this. So you basically want to right click over here on this top bit, and then right click columns, and then switches, and then you will see it appear over there. Very simple, but it's just important to know. Or that goes for really anything that you see missing over here or that you might want to see. You just go into that column section and choose. Anyway, so let's click on this checkbox, this motion blur checkbox, and you can see that it now is filled in to this box when I do that. And I'm going to move back, and then if we hit play, let's have a look at what it does. So actually I want to tick it off to just show you again. This is what the animation looks like. Again, looks like that. Now let's see what happens when we add in the motion blur. I'll do that again. Now, it's almost difficult to tell, and that's because this animation is pretty long, but there is a difference. Let me draw this keyframe a little closer in, and now you can see there when we're paused, you can see that it quite literally adds in a motion blur. So if we actually take off motion blur, you can see it will look like that as it's animating, and then with motion blur, it looks like that. And I'll show you now again what that looks like. So that's with motion blur. It's a pretty quick animation. I'll just move it a little bit across. So that's with motion blur, then without motion blur. And there you go. Very useful. It's very useful stuff. It can just make animations in general look so much better. And I'll actually show you, in the case, because we're using a text right now, I'll show you what you can do with some of the preset animation, text animations that After Effects gives you. For example, we can head into here, animation presets. Let's go and find a text animation preset, and let's say it's animate in, and we've got a character shuffle in. So let's just have a look at what this looks like. So we've got that, right? You can actually add a motion blur to this animation, and it just adds that smoothness in. I'll play it without motion blur so you can kind of see. Now with motion blur, it does look smoother. It's sometimes hard to tell, especially if it's a longer animation like this, but I promise you that there will always be a difference, and it just generally looks nicer with a motion blur. Now, the context can sometimes change this up. Sometimes you want that like rougher look, depending on the animation style you're going for. But in a lot of cases, you're gonna like the motion blur just looks so much nicer. Don't overdo it. Like if you feel like you're overdoing it, there's just motion blur everywhere. Obviously, be a little bit more conservative with that, but it is a great tool to have in mind, and especially when you're doing like a bunch of animations and you really want it to just look smoother. Motion blur just does a brilliant job of this. In fact, what we can do, and I'll show you now. Let's do an example of let's say we have a rectangle, and sometimes you might see me in my videos. I do this sort of thing where a newspaper might suddenly animate in from like below upwards, and it actually looks pretty smooth when it does this. And I'll show you basically how I managed to achieve that. Is if you imagine we've got a newspaper here, and we're going to animate it by going to position. So we have it down here, move a little into our timeline, keyframe another position, move that up, just like that. I mean, it's not entirely filling the screen, but that's fine. And so this is what it would normally look like, something like that. Move it out again. So it'll look like something like that, and then we add in the motion blur now, and you can see the difference. There is a very subtle difference. Now it's going to look more noticeable as I like show you a couple other things that you can do with your animations to make them look better, where you'll start to really see the beauty of having a motion blur. And so let's actually get right into that. So I'm just going to delete this this little box that we've created, and we're just going to head back to our text. So our James Jani text is here. Let's recreate the animation that we just had. So we start down here, let's keyframe, move a little across the timeline, keyframe again, move it up like that. So this is the animation that we've been working with, and then we've added in a motion blur. So we've got something like this. Pretty good, but you'll notice that the animation starts here. It's very much like the same speed all throughout, and it like abruptly stops over here. Which, again, depending on the context, that might be what you're looking for. But in a lot of animations, you kind of want a little bit of a range, right? You want there to be maybe it starts up faster here, and then it slows down over here, or maybe it speeds up here and then starts slowing down, and then eventually it starts speeding up, or it starts slow, starts speeding up in the middle, and then it just slows down over here, right? So you may want to vary it up. And you'll actually notice that a lot of people do this, and you may have been wondering, like I did when I was first seeing it, like how is that even possible? And that's where we get into the speed graph editor in After Effects. Now, disclaimer, don't be scared when you see this. It can look intimidating, and I promise you it's very easy to like get a basic grasp of, and maybe like I'm not going to be able to like perfectly explain everything. I'm still learning about the graph editor now, but once I kind of give you just a gist of the basics, you will understand it completely. Don't be intimidated with what you're about to see. Let's first assume that we wanted to get this animation to slow down a little bit here. Now, before you even need to head into the graph editor, there is something that you can do which will maybe make this process a little easier for you if you don't want to do too much messing around. And what you can do is if you go onto this last keyframe, right, which is where we want it to slow down around here, if we right click and we hit keyframe assistant and we can go to easy ease. Now let's play. You can see there is a very slow, it's subtle, but you can definitely see it. It slows down just a little bit. And that is what Easy Ease does. It allows it to just slow down at this point. Now, I'm going to show you, when we highlight these two keyframes of this animation and then head into this graph editor, I'm going to show you what this kind of represents, what we're seeing here on this graph, because this graph is basically representing what that animation speed looks like. Now, a bit of a disclaimer again, if you're not seeing this, or just in case you're not too sure you're seeing the right graph in front of you, which can happen, you want to make sure that you head over into this section over here, and you want to make sure that you've clicked on edit speed graph. You want to make sure that this is ticked, because sometimes you might see edit value graph and it'll look something like this and you're like, well, I have no idea what I'm looking at and this doesn't look like what James has. If that's the case, click on this icon over here where it says choose graph type and options. You can click it and then you can click edit speed graph to make sure you've got this thing, something that looks like this. Now I'll just show you basically what you're looking at is this graph kind of represents what this animation looks like when it comes to its speed and its velocity. So in this graph you can kind of see we get more of speed at the start and then it eventually kind of starts slowing down. And if you just kind of look at the animation and the graph at the same time, you can see how that's reflected in it. You can see how we slowly get that slowdown right at the end, and we have a lot of that speed just in this initial few moments of the animation. So again, and so really, well, you're probably wondering, okay, so like how do we then edit this graph? How can we change this up, make it look more interesting? Let's say we wanted more of a speed up at the start and then more of a slowdown at the end. Well, to edit this speed graph, what we want to do is we want to highlight these 2 points. You're going to see 2 points over here, one here, one here. They represent the keyframes. If we go back to our timeline over here, they represent these 2 keyframes. So highlight them both and head into our speed graph. And then we're just going to click and drag and highlight these 2 points, and you'll see that you have now this yellow square with a line and this yellow dot. And we're going to be dealing with the yellow dots for now. And so what we want is very fast at the start, slow down at the end. I'm going to be clicking this little yellow dot over here. And I'm just going to click and I'm just going to drag it all the way to the left, or at least as much as we can. So it kind of lets us go into the middle bit over here. That's as far as we can drag it to the left. And now you'll notice with the speed graph what that looks like. So we have this huge sharp spike in our graph, and then it eventually starts fizzling out and gets very slow towards the end. And you're going to now see how that plays out in our actual animation. There you go, right? That's completely different now. And we've added in just something that looks a little more interesting. And now this is where we get to kind of see more of a difference between motion blur and no motion blur. So that's with motion blur, and then without motion blur, like that. So there's more difference. This is a little more noticeable. So the speed graph lets you really get to mess around a lot with this animation. And it entirely depends on what you're going for. You might see in many cases I'll have an animation that really, I love doing this thing where it kind of starts fast and then slows down, especially when it comes to like text or even highlighting, because you can again use this for many different reasons. So let's just actually show you. If I head into our pen tool here, and I'm going to create like kind of like the highlight effects that you see me use in videos. So let's go ahead and create something. I'm going to remove the fill. So hit the pen icon. I'm going to make a line like this. So this is going to represent our highlight, and then expand this shape layer, click on add, trim paths, open that up. And this is how I now do my highlights. I used to use like linear wipe, and it was a much longer like far more inconvenient method. This is much better now using trim paths. So we've expanded trim paths. Let's just animate this. So we're going to go click there. Going to add in another keyframe, and then we're going to drop. Actually, this end percentage is at 100%, and then the first keyframe is at 0. So now we see this animation. Let's actually just unsee the James Jani text so we can focus on this. So you see how that's a pretty straightforward animation, right? And sometimes this highlight is exactly what you want. You don't want like to mess with the velocity, or sometimes you maybe want a bit more, want to make it a little more interesting. So again, we can highlight these 2 keyframes. We can right click, we can make this, you can go to keyframe assistant, easy ease, and you can look at what that does. So now that adds this whole thing of like, it slowly eases in, has a lot of like, has a lot more speed towards the middle, and then slows down again. It's very small, but let me actually extend the animation out so you can see it and it's more obvious. So just like that. But perhaps you may want now to have it kind of speed up at the start and then slow down afterwards. So all we got to do is highlight these 2 keyframes, head into our graph editor, and highlight these 2 points with the yellow dots. And then we said we wanted it to speed up at the start. So let's reflect that on our graph by moving these 2 dots like that. You can zoom out and in with the plus and minus button, very similar to a timeline. And you can just press play and you can see how that looks. And this like reflects so much what you see in maybe many like Netflix kind of newspaper scenes where they start highlighting text. Like it looks exactly like this, where they sort of start off a little slow and then it speeds up towards the end, and it just looks interesting, right? There's something more interesting about it. I think you can even add in a motion blur. I don't know if it does much though in the case of highlighting. Yeah, it's not really much of a noticeable difference when it comes to highlighting things, but these were very useful things for me when I was animating. Just being aware of how you can change the speed up of what the animation, of how fast the animation goes, or where it slows down, or where it speeds up. There are actually like good plugins that I've seen. I haven't used them yet, but I really need to get them because it allows you to kind of do all of this with like a click in, or basically just clicking a button. To select what kind of animation you want to do. I can't actually remember what the plugin is, but I will be keeping I'll be keeping you guys updated. I do want to do a plugin video, or on those kind of plugins that are really useful for things like After Effects and Premiere Pro, because I actually don't use a lot, so I've like had to do a bit of researching into plugins for things that might help. And there is actually a plugin that allows you to do similar things like this, where you can edit that speed graph like by literally clicking some buttons, and it will just look much easier. But it's always nice to know and understand how to do this yourself before you go and buy any plugin. So I think that basically covers the most of kind of making your animations look better, and this is done all in After Effects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch up to Premiere Pro, and I'm going to show you how you can replicate this very similar thing in Premiere Pro. Okay, so we're in a Premiere Pro project here, and I'm just going to type up exactly what we had on After Effects, which was James Jani, was just my name. And typically when we're animating in Premiere Pro, we use this vector motion section to animate things across, where you can see position, scale, rotation, etc, etc. So let's just say we wanted to do the animation of, and make sure as always you've got it highlighted here. Let's say we want to do the animation where the text starts off down here, so we move it over here, we keyframe the position and move this across, and then move it all the way up here like that. And let's just have a look. So here is our vector motion position that we've got here, and the animation that we've created looks something like this. Again, I like how we started off with After Effects, but it doesn't look that great, you know. There's nothing special about this. But you're probably wondering, okay, but then how do I add in then the motion blur? How do I change up the speed and velocity of it and all of this stuff? Well, you can't actually do that through this vector motion section. And it's actually a lot of people, when they do end up animating the position of something or the scale of something in Premiere Pro, they don't actually use vector motion. It's not an efficient way of doing this. So what they actually use is an effect, and it's called transform. And I'm going to show you this. I'm just going to remove our animations that we've created here, and let's just reset this all. So remove the keyframe, right click, and see, even After Effects has this thing where you can just reset the position, but apparently I've almost forgotten that like Premiere Pro doesn't have that. So shows you like I don't do any or like much animating inside of Premiere Pro. But anyway, we've got our text over here. Let's head into our effects tab over here, and now let's search up transform. Cool, it's under distort, so video effects, distort, transform. I'm just going to click and we're going to drag that into our text. With the transform effect inside of our text layer here, you can notice it in our effects controls window. We've got the transform effect here, and you'll notice that it basically has a lot of what we already have in the vector motion section. So I'll show you that these things are separate here. So you've got transform and you've got vector motion. So vector motion has position, scale, rotation, anchor point, etc. And then transform has a very similar thing, and it has a few other additional features, but one of the most important ones for achieving a motion blur is this shutter angle feature. And so what we want to do, essentially what shutter angle does is it allows you to achieve that motion blur effect inside of Premiere Pro. But to first do that, let's uncheck use compositions shutter angle, because we're creating our own artificial one. And under shutter angle, let's change this, and normally the highest amount of motion blur will be 360. You can sometimes drop this to like 180 if it's too much for you, but let's go with 360. So that now adds in a motion blur. Now that we've changed the shutter angle to 360, let's actually animate this this text. And the important thing here is we're not using the vector motion section anymore, so we can, remove that. Well, not remove it, but you can click on these sort of drop down arrow, and that gets rid of it. And so now what we can do is under our transform effect over here, we can click on the position. And let's just make sure that it's sometimes like when you're dealing with the text, what I noticed is that it can be really annoying when you're dealing with text layers on Premiere Pro. Again, this is another reason why sometimes it's just easier to deal with this on After Effects. But when you're trying to like position or change the position under the transform effect, sometimes you'll notice that it's not actually doing anything here in our position window. It only messes around with the text like as its own, like under this sort of essential graphics area. Anyway, I don't want to complicate things a little more, but to just make things easier for yourself, under the transform effect, under the position, you just want to maybe try and move it around yourself until you see this little circle with the blue lines, or just actually just only use the numbers over here and just click and drag to move it around, or you can just use this little circle section, and that actually you'll notice how the position moves when I actually move the text itself, and that moves under our transform effect position. So that's just important. Hopefully that doesn't confuse you too much, but text layers can be really annoying when it comes to this. So anyway, let's keyframe a position at the start. Let's go into the position here. Let's just drag that down to the bottom left. And now let's move a little across our timeline, add a keyframe, and let's actually move this position. So let me go there, and then I'm just going to move it across because we can't actually see it. So there we go. Let's move it a little bit upwards. See, and then now we can click here and have it go over to there, for example. And now if we play this animation, you'll see that motion blur. So that's quite a long animation. Let's drag that down a little. Now you can really see, and that's a lot of motion blur. Like that is a huge amount. But I mean, that might be what you're going for. So we can actually turn it down to 270. Get that. Let's turn it down even more drastically so you can see what this really does. So to 180 does that. And then you compare it to 360, and that's what 360 looks like. You can barely even see the text as it's moving. So cool. That is how you add in the motion blur to your animations. And a lot of people recommend on Premiere Pro that you in fact use transform effect when you want to move things around, as opposed to using the vector motion section. Now, the last thing that I'm going to show you is how you achieve the similar sort of thing where you can control the speed. Very similar to After Effects, where let's first just let's make it so that it comes in slower at this point on the last keyframe. So we can select that last keyframe, right click, and then head on to temporal interpolation, and then just head into should be ease out, I believe, because this thing is kind of easing out. Actually, I'm probably wrong there. Temporal interpolation, ease in. Yeah, I think it's ease in. Yes, so you can see how it's a very subtle, slowly eases in right at the end, just like that. And then let's add in a temporal interpolation. Let's add in an ease out over here. And so it kind of starts off a little slow, faster all the way in the middle, and then slows down again at the end, just like that. Pretty nice, looks like a pretty smooth animation. Now you're probably wondering, can we do any more edits if need be? Can we make even more changes? How do we get that speed graph? Well, you can actually get the speed graph, although it doesn't look as great in Premiere Pro. You can highlight both keyframes, expand the position section here or using this arrow, and if you notice, it's really small, but in here we've basically got what the speed graph looks like in After Effects, but just a smaller version of it. And instead of the yellow dots, we've got these blue dots over here. But a very similar thing, if we want it to be very fast at the start and then slow down more towards the end, let's just click the blue dots, drag them over here, go back, and now you can see we can do the exact same thing. Or if we want it faster towards the end, let's actually increase the animation length here so that we can actually see it more in action. So now let's make it more slower at the start and then faster finish, just like that. You can see what that does. So hopefully that kind of covers making your animations look a little bit more interesting. Again, like, you can use text, you can use circles, like anything basically that you can think of, you can use to change up your animations. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers a lot. I think especially for me when I was first starting out and like experimenting with animations, is probably the most the most effective thing I've used to make it look better in many cases. But let me know if you have any other questions, if you have any other things you'd like to ask about. Do let me know. I really hope this helps out. It definitely is something that I wish I knew of when I was first doing animations and experimenting with this stuff in After Effects. So I hope you found that helpful. Let me know by commenting down below if this was helpful at all, if there's any other suggestions you guys might have when it comes to video editing. It honestly feels like there's just a whole world of tutorials out there that I could do, so I'm kind of like trying to guess where you guys might be at and seeing what's most helpful. But yeah, let me know your suggestions down below, comment it, and yeah, hopefully this was helpful. With that being said, my friends, as always, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Hand to head, salute.